The dust devil swirled across the wooden planks of Morrison's trading post, and Georgia Owens stood perfectly still in the scorching Nevada heat, watching the wagon that had carried her disappear into the shimmering distance without so much as a backward glance. Her carpetbag sat at her feet, everything she owned in this world reduced to one worn leather case and the dress on her back, and she refused to let the tears burning behind her eyes fall, because crying never changed a damned thing. The year was 1876, and Eldorado Canyon was nothing more than a collection of weathered buildings clinging to existence in the desert, a place where silver miners and drifters came to forget their pasts, and apparently where unwanted sisters got abandoned by family who found her presence inconvenient after their mother's death. The trading post door creaked open behind her, and she heard boots on the wooden porch, but she kept her gaze fixed on the horizon where the wagon had vanished, carrying her brother and his new wife away to California, where they could start fresh without the burden of a 20-year-old woman who reminded them too much of obligations they did not want. The footsteps stopped beside her, and a man's voice, rough as sandpaper but not unkind, broke the oppressive silence that had settled over her like a shroud. "You planning on standing there until you turn into a cactus, miss? Or are you waiting for something?" Georgia turned to look at him then. This stranger who had witnessed her humiliation from inside the trading post where her brother had purchased supplies, and left her standing outside like forgotten cargo. The man was tall and lean, somewhere in his mid-20s she guessed, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of whiskey that seemed to take in everything without judgment. He wore the clothes of a working cowboy, dusty denim, and a shirt that had seen better days, a gun belt slung low on his hips in the casual way of men who knew how to use what they carried. "I am not waiting for anything," she said, lifting her chin in defiance of the situation she found herself in. "There is nothing left to wait for." He studied her for a long moment, those whiskey-colored eyes moving from her face to the carpetbag at her feet and back again, and she saw something shift in his expression, a softening around the hard edges that life in this unforgiving country carved into people. He reached down and picked up her bag before she could protest, testing its weight with an ease that spoke of strength hidden beneath the worn clothes. "Owen Lawrence," he said by way of introduction. "I've got a wagon heading out in about 10 minutes. Where to?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility, and the strange kindness of a man who owed her nothing, but was offering her something anyway. Georgia felt her throat tighten with emotions she could not name, gratitude and desperation, and a wild hope that maybe this was not the end of everything after all. She looked into his eyes and saw genuine concern there, not pity, and that made all the difference in the world. "Anywhere but here," she answered, her voice steady despite the chaos of her thoughts. Owen nodded once, as if her answer made perfect sense, and gestured toward a wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses at the end of the trading post. "Come on then. I am heading up to Virginia City to deliver some horses to a ranch there. It is a 3-day journey, but there are towns along the way where you can figure out your next move. No charge for the company." She followed him to the wagon, her legs moving automatically while her mind tried to catch up with what was happening. This stranger was offering her escape, offering her a chance to leave behind the spot where her brother had discarded her like trash. And she was going to take it, because the alternative was standing in that dust, until she withered away or accepted charity from people in a town that had nothing to spare. Owen placed her carpetbag in the back of the wagon with practiced care, then offered his hand to help her up onto the seat. His palm was calloused and warm, the hand of a man who worked hard for everything he had, and Georgia felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with her desperate circumstances. The wagon lurched into motion, and Eldorado Canyon began to fall away behind them, the trading post growing smaller with each rotation of the wheels. Georgia sat straight-backed beside Owen, acutely aware of his presence, the way he handled the reins with confident ease, the subtle shifts of his body as he guided the horses onto the northern trail. The silence between them was not uncomfortable exactly, but it was weighted with unasked questions and the strangeness of two people thrown together by chance and necessity. "Your brother?" Owen asked after they had traveled for perhaps a mile, his eyes staying on the road ahead. "Yes," Georgia said simply, because what else was there to say? That her brother had promised to take care of her after their mother passed. That his new wife had made it clear there was no room for Georgia in their new life. That she had been given the choice between staying in their Missouri hometown as an unpaid servant to distant relatives, or accompanying them west only to be abandoned at the first opportunity. The whole sordid story felt too heavy to speak aloud to a stranger, even one who had just saved her from an impossible situation. Owen made a sound that might have been understanding or disgust. She could not tell which. Family can be the worst kind of cruel sometimes. They know exactly where to stick the knife. There was something in his voice that spoke of personal experience, and Georgia glanced at him, taking in the hard line of his jaw and the way tension gathered in his shoulders. "You sound like you know something about that." "My father tried to beat the wildness out of me from the time I could walk until I was big enough to hit back," Owen said, his tone matter of fact, as if he were discussing the weather rather than violence and pain. "Left home at 15 and never looked back. Been working ranches and driving cattle ever since. It is not much of a life, but it is mine, and nobody gets to tell me otherwise." The honesty of his words struck something deep inside Georgia, a recognition of shared experience even if the details differed. They were both people who had been cast aside by family, forced to make their own way in a world that did not care much about their struggles or their survival. The realization created an unexpected bond between them, fragile but real, and Georgia felt some of the tension she had been carrying begin to ease. "I was supposed to marry a banker's son back in Missouri," she offered, surprising herself with the confession. "He was 43 years old and had buried 2 wives already. My mother refused to allow it, said I deserved better than to be some old man's nursemaid and breeding stock. My brother promised he would honor her wishes, but I guess promises do not mean much when they become inconvenient." Owen's hands tightened on the reins, his knuckles going white for just a moment before he deliberately relaxed his grip. "Your mother sounds like she was a good woman." "She was the best," Georgia said, and this time she could not stop the tears that slipped down her cheeks, silent and hot in the desert sun. "She died 6 months ago, pneumonia, and everything fell apart after that. My brother changed, or maybe his wife changed him, I do not know. Either way, I became a problem that needed solving, and I suppose leaving me at a trading post in the middle of nowhere was his solution." Owen was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer than before, almost gentle. "You are not a problem, Georgia Owens. You are just a person who got dealt a rotten hand. But the thing about cards is you can always fold and wait for the next deal. Virginia City is not paradise, but there are opportunities there for people willing to work. Boarding houses always need help, or maybe you could find work in one of the shops. Point is, you have got options now that you are out of that canyon." The use of her name startled her, and she realized she had never actually introduced herself. He must have heard it when her brother was conducting business at the trading post. The fact that he had paid attention, that he had cared enough to remember, sent warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the Nevada heat. She studied his profile, the strong nose and stubborn chin, the way his eyes constantly scanned the horizon with the vigilance of someone who had learned to watch for danger. He was handsome in a rough-hewn way, but more than that, he was kind, and kindness was a rare commodity in her experience. They traveled through the afternoon, the landscape shifting subtly around them from desert scrub to slightly greener terrain as they climbed in elevation. Owen pointed out landmarks, explaining the geography with the knowledge of someone who had ridden these trails many times before. He told her about Virginia City, about the silver boom that had transformed it from a mining camp into a real town with schools and churches, and even an opera house. He spoke of the horses he was delivering, fine animals bred for ranch work, and the payment he would receive that would keep him fed and sheltered through the coming winter. Georgia listened and asked questions, genuinely interested in his stories, in the life he had carved out for himself through sheer determination and hard work. She found herself watching the way his mouth moved when he talked, the rare smile that would transform his serious face into something almost boyish. There was an easiness developing between them, a comfort that should not have been possible between strangers but somehow was, as if they had known each other far longer than a few hours. When the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that took Georgia's breath away, Owen guided the wagon off the main trail toward a stand of cottonwood trees near a small creek. "We will camp here tonight," he said, setting the brake and jumping down with athletic grace. "There is water for the horses and good grass. I have got supplies for dinner, nothing fancy, but it will fill your belly." Georgia accepted his help down from the wagon, again feeling that flutter in her chest when his hands spanned her waist, strong and steady. She had never been this close to a man who was not family, had never felt the kind of awareness that was thrumming through her now, making her hyper-conscious of every movement, every breath. Owen seemed unaffected, already moving to unhitch the horses with practiced efficiency. But Georgia caught the way his eyes lingered on her for just a moment too long, the slight hesitation before he turned away, and she wondered if maybe she was not alone in this strange attraction. She made herself useful, gathering dead wood for a fire, while Owen tended the animals, needing something to do with her hands and her nervous energy. By the time he had the horses settled and watered, she had assembled a respectable pile of fuel and was attempting to arrange it in the fire ring that showed this spot was a frequent camping location. Owen crouched beside her, his shoulder nearly touching hers, and she caught the scent of him, horse and leather and something else, something masculine and appealing that made her stomach flip. "Here," he said, demonstrating how to arrange the wood for maximum airflow. "You want to build a teepee shape first with the kindling in the center, then add the larger pieces once it catches. Fire needs to breathe, same as anything alive." His hands moved with confidence, striking a match and sheltering the tiny flame until it caught the dry grass and kindling, growing into a proper fire that pushed back the gathering darkness. Georgia watched, fascinated not just by the fire but by him, by the quiet competence he brought to every task. This was a man who knew how to survive, who had learned through necessity and experience how to take care of himself in a harsh world, and she found that incredibly attractive in a way she had never expected. Owen prepared their dinner with the same efficiency he brought to everything else, frying salt pork and beans in a skillet over the fire, brewing coffee that was strong enough to strip paint, but tasted like heaven after the long day. They ate in companionable silence, sitting on opposite sides of the fire, the flames dancing between them like a living thing. Georgia could not remember the last time she had felt this content, this safe, despite being in the middle of nowhere with a man she had just met. It should have been frightening, should have felt dangerous, but instead it felt right in a way she could not explain. "Tell me about Missouri," Owen said after they had finished eating and were nursing their coffee cups. "What was it like growing up there?" Georgia considered the question, sifting through memories both good and painful. "It was green," she said finally. "So much green, trees and grass and crops growing in the fields, nothing like this desert. We had a small house on the edge of town, and my mother took in sewing to make ends meet after my father died when I was 7. She taught me everything she knew, how to cut patterns and make stitches so small they were almost invisible. I thought maybe I would be a seamstress too, have a little shop of my own someday." "You still could," Owen pointed out. "Virginia City has plenty of people who need clothes made and mended. Rich miners spend money like water, and their wives want to show off." "Maybe," Georgia said, allowing herself to imagine it, a future that was her own choice rather than something forced upon her. "What about you? What are your plans beyond delivering these horses?" Owen stared into the fire, his expression turning thoughtful. "I have been saving money for the past 6 years," he said slowly, as if the words were being pulled from somewhere deep inside. "Every dollar I could spare beyond what I needed to survive. There is a piece of land up near Carson City, good grazing and a creek that runs year-round. The owner died last winter, and his widow wants to sell. I am close to having enough for a down payment, close enough to taste it. I want to build something, you know? Something that is mine, that nobody can take away or tell me I do not deserve." The passion in his voice was unmistakable, and Georgia felt her heart squeeze with emotion. This was his dream, the thing that kept him going through hard work and harder days, and she understood that on a bone-deep level because she had lost her own dreams so recently. "That sounds wonderful," she said softly. "I hope you get it, Owen. I hope you build something amazing there." He looked up at her then, really looked at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "Come with me," he said, the words seeming to surprise him as much as they surprised her. "I mean not like that, I am not proposing anything improper, but you could work for me, help me get the ranch started. I would pay you fair wages, and you would have a place to stay, a roof over your head while you figure out what you want. No obligations beyond honest work." Georgia's mind raced, trying to process the offer and all its implications. This was crazy, accepting a job from a man she had known for less than a day, agreeing to go to some remote ranch in the middle of nowhere. It was impulsive and reckless and completely unlike her usual careful nature. But what did careful get her? A brother who abandoned her and a future as uncertain as the desert wind. At least with Owen she would have work and wages and the chance to build toward something better. "Yes," she heard herself say, the word coming out stronger than she felt. "Yes, I will come with you." The smile that broke across Owen's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds, transforming him from merely handsome to absolutely devastating. "Yeah?" he asked, as if he could not quite believe she had agreed. "You mean it?" "I mean it," Georgia confirmed, feeling her own smile growing to match his. "Though I should warn you, I do not know the first thing about ranching. You will have to teach me everything." "I can do that," Owen said, his voice warm with pleasure and something else, something that made her pulse quicken. "I can teach you everything you need to know. We will figure it out together." The word together hung in the air between them, weighted with promise and possibility. Georgia felt as if she were standing on the edge of a cliff, about to jump into unknown waters, but for the first time since her mother died, she felt hope stirring in her chest. Maybe this was what she needed. this leap of faith with a cowboy who had stopped to help a woman in trouble. Maybe this was the beginning of something good. They talked late into the night, the fire burning down to glowing coals while they shared stories and dreams, and the kind of honest conversation that usually took months to develop. Georgia learned that Owen was 26 years old, that his birthday was in October, that he had once been trampled by a bull and carried the scars on his ribs to prove it. She learned that his favorite food was apple pie, that he had taught himself to read from an old Bible he found in a bunkhouse, that he had never been in love but sometimes wondered what it might be like. She told him about her mother's laugh, about the songs she used to sing while sewing, about the garden they had kept that produced the most magnificent tomatoes every summer. She confessed her fear of thunderstorms, her love of books, her secret dream of seeing the ocean someday. Owen listened to all of it with an attention that made her feel seen in a way she had never experienced before, as if every word she spoke mattered to him. When they finally settled down to sleep, Owen insisted she take his bedroll while he made do with a saddle blanket near the fire. Georgia protested, but he was immovable on the subject, his sense of propriety and protection overriding any practical concerns. She lay in his bedroll, which smelled like him, and stared up at the impossible number of stars visible in the clear desert sky. Her life had changed so completely in the span of a single day that it felt almost like a dream, but the hard ground beneath her, and the distant howl of a coyote reminded her this was very real. She fell asleep thinking about Owen Lawrence and his dream of a ranch, wondering what role she might play in that dream, hoping it might become hers too. Morning came with the startling beauty of desert sunrise, the sky turning from purple to pink to gold in a matter of minutes. Georgia woke to find Owen already up and moving, having rekindled the fire and set coffee to brew. He looked tired, with shadows under his eyes that suggested he had not slept much, but his smile when he saw her was genuine and warm. "Morning," he said, handing her a cup of coffee once she had emerged from the bedroll. "We should make good time today if the weather holds. There is a town called Silver Springs about halfway to Virginia City where we can stop for a proper meal and supplies." They broke camp with a coordination that should not have been possible for two people who had just met, but somehow they fell into a rhythm, each anticipating what needed to be done and doing it. Georgia found herself enjoying the work, the purposefulness of it, so different from the aimless existence she had been living with her brother. With Owen, every action had meaning, moved them toward a goal, and she liked that sense of forward momentum. The second day of travel was even easier than the first, the initial awkwardness between them melting away as they grew more comfortable with each other's presence. Owen taught her about the land they were passing through, pointing out plants and animals, explaining the geology that created the strange rock formations dotting the landscape. Georgia soaked it all in, hungry for knowledge, wanting to understand this new world she found herself in. They reached Silver Springs just after noon, a small town that made Eldorado Canyon look like a metropolis by comparison. Owen pulled the wagon up in front of a building with a hand-painted sign declaring it to be Sally's restaurant and boarding house. Inside, the proprietor, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, looked them over with undisguised curiosity. "Owen Lawrence," she said, recognition lighting her face. "I have not seen you in months. Who is this you have got with you?" "This is Miss Georgia Owens," Owen said, his tone polite but firm in a way that discouraged too many questions. "She is going to be working with me on my new ranch venture. We would appreciate 2 lunch plates and whatever news you might have." Sally's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline, but she was smart enough not to push for more information when Owen clearly was not offering. Have a seat then. I have got beef stew today, and the bread is fresh this morning. Over lunch, Sally filled them in on local happenings, births and deaths and business dealings that meant nothing to Georgia but seemed to interest Owen. She also mentioned that the land near Carson City was still available, that the widow was getting anxious to sell and might be willing to negotiate on price. Owen's eyes lit up at this information, and Georgia could practically see his mind working through calculations and possibilities. After they left Silver Springs, the atmosphere in the wagon had shifted subtly. Owen seemed energized by Sally's news, talking more freely about his plans for the ranch, asking Georgia's opinion on things like where to place the house and how many cattle to start with. She had no expertise to offer, but she gave her thoughts anyway, enjoying being included in his planning, feeling like maybe she really could be part of this dream he was building. That night, they camped under a sky-threatening rain, the air heavy with moisture that was rare in this dry country. Owen built a larger fire than usual and strung a canvas tarp between the wagon and some nearby rocks, creating a makeshift shelter. They huddled under it as the rain finally came, a brief fierce storm that drummed on the canvas and turned the air cool and sweet. "Georgia," Owen said during a lull in the rain, his voice serious in the darkness. "I want you to know I meant what I said about this being proper. You will have your own room in the house, your own space. I am not expecting anything from you beyond honest work. I need to make sure you understand that." Georgia felt her face heat despite the cool air. "I know that," she said quietly. "I trust you, Owen. I would not have agreed to come otherwise." "Good," he said, and she could hear the relief in his voice. "That is good. I just needed to say it out loud, make sure we are clear on things." They were silent for a moment, listening to the rain taper off to a gentle patter. Then Georgia found herself speaking, saying things she had not planned to say. "When I was standing at that trading post, watching my brother leave, I thought my life was over. I thought I had reached the end of everything that mattered. But then you walked out that door and asked me where I wanted to go, and suddenly there were possibilities again. You saved me, Owen Lawrence, and I do not just mean from being stranded. You reminded me that there is still good in the world, still people who help for no reason except that it is the right thing to do." Owen shifted beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth through the cool air. "You saved yourself," he said firmly. "You could have broken down crying or given up, but you did not. You held your head high and made a choice to move forward. That takes strength, Georgia. Real strength. All I did was offer you a ride." "It was more than a ride," Georgia insisted, turning to look at him in the darkness. "It was hope when I had none left." She could barely make out his features in the dim light from the dying fire, but she saw his hand move, reaching toward her face, and then stopping, hovering uncertainly in the space between them. Georgia made the decision for both of them, leaning forward just enough to close the distance, letting his calloused palm cup her cheek with infinite gentleness. The touch sent electricity racing through her body, every nerve suddenly alive and aware. "Georgia," Owen breathed, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheekbone. "I am trying to do the right thing here, trying to be honorable, but you are making it very difficult." "Maybe I do not want you to be honorable," Georgia whispered, surprised by her own boldness. "Maybe I want you to kiss me." Owen made a sound that was half laugh, half groan. "You do not know what you are asking. You have been through too much. Your emotions are all mixed up. I do not want to take advantage." "You are not taking advantage if I am asking," Georgia pointed out, her hand coming up to cover his where it still rested against her face. "I know my own mind, Owen. I know what I want, and I want you to kiss me, please." That final word, spoken so softly, it was almost lost in the patter of rain, seemed to break whatever internal resistance Owen had been maintaining. He leaned forward, closing the distance between them with agonizing slowness, giving her every opportunity to change her mind. But Georgia did not change her mind. She stayed perfectly still, barely breathing, until his lips finally met hers in a kiss that was gentle and questioning and absolutely perfect. The world seemed to stop turning for the space of that kiss. Georgia felt as if she were falling and flying at the same time, every sensation heightened to an almost painful degree. Owen's lips were softer than she expected, his kiss reverent rather than demanding, as if she were something precious that might break if handled roughly. She responded instinctively, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest where she could feel the rapid beating of his heart, proof that he was as affected by this as she was. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "That was either the best decision or the worst mistake I have ever made," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I cannot decide which." "Best decision," Georgia said firmly, her fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. "Definitely the best decision." Owen laughed, the sound warm and genuine, and pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her in an embrace that felt like coming home. They sat like that for a long time, holding each other under the makeshift shelter while the rain finally stopped and the clouds began to break apart, revealing glimpses of starlight. The rest of the journey to Virginia City passed in a kind of wonderful haze. Everything looked brighter, more beautiful, as if the world itself had been transformed by that single kiss. Owen and Georgia fell into an easy physical closeness, hands brushing during the day, sitting pressed together by the fire at night, stealing kisses when the mood struck them. It felt natural and right, as if they had been moving toward this from the moment Owen walked out of that trading post. They reached Virginia City 3 days after leaving Eldorado Canyon, the town sprawling across the hillside in a jumble of buildings both permanent and temporary. Owen completed his horse delivery at a ranch on the outskirts of town, collecting payment that he counted carefully before tucking into an inside pocket. Georgia watched the transaction with interest, noting the respect the ranch owner showed Owen, the way they spoke as equals despite their different circumstances. "Now what?" she asked as they drove the empty wagon back into town. "Now we go see about that land," Owen said, his eyes bright with excitement and nerves. "See if we can make a deal with the widow. If she agrees to my terms, we could be in our new home within a week." Our new home. The words sent a thrill through Georgia that had nothing to do with the prospect of shelter, and everything to do with the man beside her. They had known each other less than a week, but somehow it felt like a lifetime, as if all the experiences before meeting him had been just preparation for this moment. The widow, Mrs. Eleanor Thompson, lived in a neat house on the western edge of Virginia City. She was a woman in her 60s, still strong despite her age, with shrewd eyes that assessed Owen carefully when he explained his business. Georgia sat quietly during the negotiation, watching Owen handle himself with confidence and clarity, laying out his financial situation honestly and making a fair offer for the land. Mrs. Thompson considered for a long moment, her gaze moving between Owen and Georgia with an expression that suggested she was seeing far more than they realized. "You two married?" she asked abruptly. Owen's ears turned red, but he answered honestly, "No, madam. Miss Owens is going to be working for me, helping me get the ranch established." "Uh-huh," Mrs. Thompson said, her tone making it clear she did not believe that was the full story. "Young man, I have been on this earth a long time, and I know the look of two people falling in love when I see it. You can save your propriety speeches for someone who cares. What I want to know is whether you are serious about making a success of this ranch, or if you are just a dreamer with more ambition than sense." "I am serious," Owen said firmly. "I have been working toward this for 6 years, saving every penny, learning everything I can about ranching and livestock and managing land. I know it will be hard, especially the first few years, but I am not afraid of hard work. Neither is Georgia. We will make it succeed because failure is not an option we are willing to accept." Mrs. Thompson smiled then, a real smile that softened her stern features. "That is what I wanted to hear. My husband would have liked you, young man. He believed in people who were willing to work for their dreams. I will accept your offer, but with one condition. You pay me in installments over the next 3 years, and if you miss even one payment, the land reverts back to me. That way you are not putting yourself in debt to a bank, and I have insurance that you are serious about making this work." Owen's face went through a complicated series of expressions, shock and gratitude and disbelief all warring for dominance. "Mrs. Thompson, that is more than generous. Are you certain?" "I am certain," she said. "Now get out of here and go see your new land. The deed will be ready for signing tomorrow morning." They left Mrs. Thompson's house in a state of stunned disbelief, barely able to process what had just happened. Owen had his land, his dream was becoming reality, and Georgia was going to be part of it. They rode out to see the property that afternoon, following Mrs. Thompson's directions to a beautiful piece of land, nestled in a valley with the creek running through it, just as Owen had described. The land was more than Georgia could have imagined, rich with potential despite its current wild state. The previous owner had built a small cabin that still stood solid, and there was a barn that needed repairs but was structurally sound. Owen walked the property with Georgia at his side, pointing out where he wanted to expand the cabin, where the corrals would go, how he would manage the grazing rotation for maximum sustainability. "It is perfect," Georgia breathed, taking in the view of mountains rising in the distance and the way the evening light painted everything gold. "Owen, this is absolutely perfect." Owen turned to her, his expression intense with emotion he was not bothering to hide anymore. "It is perfect because you are here with me," he said. "Georgia, I know this is fast. I know we have only known each other a few days, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I am falling in love with you. Actually, I think I was falling from the moment I saw you standing at that trading post, refusing to cry even though your world had just crumbled. You are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever met, and I want to build this dream with you. Not as my employee, but as my partner. As my wife, if you will have me." Georgia felt tears streaming down her face, but these were tears of joy rather than grief, happiness rather than despair. "Yes," she said, launching herself into his arms with enough force to make him stagger backward. "Yes, Owen Lawrence, I will marry you. I will build this dream with you and love you every day for the rest of my life." Owen caught her easily, swinging her around in a circle before setting her down and kissing her with a passion that made the previous kisses seem tame by comparison. This was not gentle or questioning. This was claiming and promising and celebrating all at once. Georgia kissed him back with equal fervor, pouring every ounce of emotion she had been holding back into the embrace. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning like fools, the sun was setting in a spectacular display of orange and purple. "We should get married soon," Owen said, practical even in the midst of romance. Mrs. Thompson was right about propriety mattering in small communities. "I do not want anyone questioning your reputation." "Tomorrow," Georgia suggested boldly. "We are already going into town to sign the papers for the land. Why not make it a double occasion?" Owen laughed, the sound full of joy and disbelief at how his life had transformed in less than a week. "Tomorrow it is then. Georgia Owens, soon to be Georgia Lawrence, you are a wonder." They spent that night in the cabin, properly on opposite sides of the room, with Owen insisting on maintaining decorum for one more night. But they talked until dawn, making plans and sharing dreams, building the foundation of their future together with words and hopes and promises. Georgia had never felt more alive, more certain that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The next morning they rode into Virginia City and conducted the most efficient series of life-changing transactions Georgia could have imagined. They signed the land deed with Mrs. Thompson, who winked at Georgia when Owen was not looking and pressed a beautiful quilt into her hands as a wedding gift. Then they walked to the small church on the main street where the minister, after hearing their story, agreed to marry them immediately despite the lack of planning or witnesses beyond the church cleaning woman. The ceremony was simple and short, but to Georgia it was perfect. She wore the same dusty traveling dress she had been wearing for days, and Owen wore his work clothes, but when he slipped a simple gold band on her finger and promised to love her forever, she felt like the most beautiful bride in the world. They kissed as husband and wife right there in the church, and the cleaning woman cried and said it was the most romantic thing she had ever witnessed. They celebrated their wedding with dinner at the nicest restaurant in Virginia City, a luxury that made Owen wince at the cost, but that he insisted was necessary to properly mark the occasion. Over roast beef and potatoes, they toasted their future with glasses of wine, and Owen told Georgia stories about his years of working ranches and saving money, all the while dreaming of this moment. "I never let myself imagine having someone to share it with," he confessed, his hand covering hers on the table. "I thought I would do it alone, that I was not the kind of man a woman would want. Too rough, too poor, too much history with violence and hardship. But you looked at me like I was someone worth knowing, worth trusting. You changed everything, Georgia." "You saved me," Georgia countered, squeezing his hand. "And not just from being stranded. You saved me from a life of bitterness and regret. You showed me that good things can happen when you are brave enough to take a chance. I love you, Owen Lawrence, and I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know it." They returned to their land that evening, to the cabin that was now officially their home. Owen carried Georgia over the threshold despite her laughing protests, and they consummated their marriage with a tenderness and passion that left them both shaken and awed by the connection between them. Afterward, lying in Owen's arms with the Nevada stars visible through the cabin window, Georgia reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. Less than a week ago she had been abandoned and hopeless, watching her brother's wagon disappear and believing her life was essentially over. Now she was married to an incredible man, co-owner of a beautiful piece of land, and filled with hope for the future. It was almost too much to process, the dramatic shift from despair to joy, but she was learning to accept that sometimes life changed in an instant, and not always for the worse. The first months of their marriage were consumed with the hard work of establishing the ranch. Owen taught Georgia everything he knew about caring for animals and managing land, and she proved to be an apt student with a natural feel for the work. They started small, purchasing a few head of cattle and some chickens, building their herd and flock slowly but steadily. The physical labor was exhausting, but Georgia found it satisfying in a way her previous life had never been. Every fence post set, every animal fed, every improvement made to the property felt like progress toward something meaningful. They worked side by side from dawn until dusk, their partnership growing stronger with each passing day. Owen proved to be everything Georgia could have wanted in a husband, thoughtful and kind, passionate and loyal, willing to listen to her opinions and treat her as an equal partner in their endeavor. He taught her to ride properly, to shoot a rifle for protection against predators, to read the weather and the land with the instincts of someone who had spent his life outdoors. In turn, Georgia brought order and comfort to their home, cooking meals that were far better than the simple fare Owen had been living on, sewing curtains and making small improvements that transformed the cabin from a bachelor's shelter into a real home. She also brought her seamstress skills to good use, taking and sewing work from nearby ranches and the town, earning money that helped them build their savings faster than Owen had anticipated. Their neighbors, a mix of ranchers, miners, and townspeople, accepted them without much fuss once it became clear they were serious about making their ranch succeed. Owen's reputation for fair dealing and hard work preceded him, and Georgia's friendly demeanor and obvious competence won people over quickly. They made friends slowly but surely, becoming part of the community that sustained life in this harsh but beautiful country. As winter approached, bringing cold winds and occasional snow to their valley, Georgia realized with a mix of excitement and nervousness that she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had waited to be certain before telling Owen, wanting to give him the news when the time was right. One evening after dinner, as they sat by the fire with Owen reading aloud from a newspaper he had brought back from town, Georgia reached out and stilled his hand. "Owen, I have something to tell you," she said, unable to keep the smile from her face. He set the paper aside immediately, his full attention on her. "What is it? Is everything all right?" "Everything is wonderful," Georgia assured him. "We are going to have a baby. Next summer, probably June if my calculations are correct." Owen's face went through a series of expressions similar to when Mrs. Thompson had offered him the land deal, shock giving way to joy, giving way to fierce protective instinct. "A baby," he repeated, as if testing the words. "Georgia, we are going to have a baby. I am going to be a father." "Are you happy?" Georgia asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy." Owen pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of spun glass. "Georgia, I am terrified and thrilled and happier than I ever thought possible. We are going to have a family. A real family, the kind I always wanted but never believed I would have. You have given me everything, absolutely everything." They spent the evening making plans, discussing how they would manage the ranch work as Georgia's pregnancy progressed, what they needed to prepare for the baby's arrival. Owen was already mentally rearranging the cabin to create a space for a nursery, his mind racing with all the things he would need to build and buy. Georgia watched him with overwhelming love, this man who had started as a stranger and become her entire world. Winter passed in a blur of work and preparation. Despite Georgia's pregnancy, she insisted on maintaining her share of the ranch duties, only conceding to Owen's protective instincts in the final months when her belly made certain tasks impossible. Owen more than made up the difference, working twice as hard to ensure she could rest, hiring occasional help from neighboring ranches when the workload became too much for one man. Their baby boy arrived on a beautiful June morning in 1877, delivered by the same widow who had sold them the land. Mrs. Thompson had become something of a friend to Georgia over the months, offering advice and support that helped ease the loneliness of living far from town. The birth was hard, as births often were, but when Owen held his son for the first time, tears streaming down his weathered face, Georgia knew every moment of pain had been worth it. They named him Daniel Owen Lawrence, and he had his father's dark hair and his mother's bright eyes. Owen was instantly besotted, spending hours just watching the baby sleep, marveling at the tiny perfection of fingers and toes. Georgia had never seen this soft side of her husband, the gentleness he brought to handling their son, the songs he would hum while walking the floor at night when Daniel fussed. "He is perfect," Owen said one night, the baby finally asleep in the cradle he had carved with his own hands. "Everything I never knew I wanted, right here in this room. You and Daniel, this life we have built, the ranch starting to turn a profit. Georgia, sometimes I am afraid I am going to wake up and discover this has all been a dream." "It is real," Georgia assured him, reaching out to take his hand. "We made this, Owen. Together we made something beautiful and lasting, and we are just getting started." She was right. Over the next few years, their ranch grew from a modest operation into a respected part of the local ranching community. Owen's skill with horses earned them a reputation for quality stock, and Georgia's business sense helped them make smart decisions about expansion and investment. They paid off their debt to Mrs. Thompson a full year early, and she cried when they made the final payment, saying her husband would have been proud to see the success they had made. Daniel grew into a sturdy, happy child, fearless and curious, always underfoot while his parents worked. Owen taught him to ride before he could properly walk, setting him on gentle horses and guiding him around the corral. Georgia taught him letters and numbers, reading to him every night, determined that her son would have the education she had cobbled together for herself. When Daniel was 3 years old, Georgia gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose Eleanor Lawrence in honor of the widow who had given them their start. Rose was quieter than her brother, more thoughtful, with a talent for gentleness with animals that surpassed even Owen's natural skill. The family felt complete in a way that filled Georgia's heart to bursting. The years passed in the way of good years, quickly, and yet fully lived. The ranch continued to prosper, allowing them to make improvements both practical and aesthetic. Owen built Georgia the proper house she deserved, with multiple bedrooms and a kitchen that was her pride and joy, a porch that wrapped around 3 sides where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sun set over their land. They faced challenges, of course. There were droughts that tested their water management, winters harsh enough to lose livestock, market fluctuations that required careful navigation. But they faced everything together, drawing on the strength of their partnership and the love that had only deepened over the years. The desperation that had brought them together had been transformed into something solid and enduring, a foundation that could weather any storm. When Georgia was 30 years old, 10 years after that fateful day at the trading post, she stood on the porch of their home and watched Owen teaching Daniel, and Rose to rope fence posts in the corral. The children's laughter rang across the valley, bright and joyful, and Owen's patient voice offered encouragement and instruction. The ranch spread out around them, prosperous and well-managed, a testament to years of hard work and careful planning. Mrs. Thompson had passed the previous winter, and they had mourned her as they would a beloved grandmother, which was essentially what she had become to their family. She had left them a letter to be read after her death, telling them how proud she was of what they had built, how her husband's dream of this land supporting a good family had been fulfilled beyond his wildest hopes through them. Georgia thought about that letter often, about the chain of kindness and chance that had led her to this moment. If her brother had not abandoned her, if Owen had not walked out of that trading post at that exact moment, if she had not been brave enough to answer anywhere but here, when he asked where she wanted to go, none of this would exist. Her children would not exist. This life, this beautiful, hard-won life, would not exist. "Mama, watch," Rose called out, successfully roping the post on her second try. "I saw, sweetheart. That was excellent," Georgia called back, her voice carrying clearly in the clean air. Owen looked up from where he was adjusting Daniel's grip on his rope and caught her eye. Even across the distance of the yard, she could see the love in his gaze, the satisfaction of a man who had found everything he had been searching for. He winked at her, that same playful gesture he had been making since the early days of their courtship, and Georgia felt her heart swell with emotion that never seemed to diminish no matter how many times she experienced it. That evening, after the children were asleep, and the ranch was quiet except for the usual night sounds of animals and wind, Georgia and Owen sat together on the porch swing he had installed for their 5th anniversary. It was a warm summer night, the air soft and sweet, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. "You ever think about that day at the trading post?" Georgia asked, her head resting on Owen's shoulder. "All the time," Owen admitted, his arm tightening around her. "I think about how close I came to just riding past, minding my own business. I almost did not stop, you know. I was on a schedule, had places to be. But something made me turn around, made me go back and see if you were all right. Best decision I ever made, stopping for you." "Best decision I ever made was answering honestly," Georgia said. "I could have made up some story, pretended I was fine, waited for someone local to help. But I told you the truth, that I needed to get anywhere but there, and you gave me that escape. You gave me everything, Owen." "We gave each other everything," Owen corrected gently. "That is what marriage is supposed to be, two people building something together that is bigger than what either could make alone. I love you, Georgia Lawrence. I loved you when you were a scared girl at a trading post. I loved you when you were pregnant and glowing with our first child. I love you now as the mother of my children and the partner in all my endeavors. I will love you until the day I die and beyond if there is anything after." Georgia lifted her head to kiss him, this man who had become her world, her anchor, her greatest adventure. "I love you too," she said against his lips. "From anywhere but here to everywhere that matters, I choose you. I will always choose you." They sat together in the peaceful darkness, holding each other, listening to the sounds of their ranch settling for the night. Inside the house, their children slept safe and warm, dreaming whatever dreams children dream. Beyond the porch, their land stretched out in all directions, the physical manifestation of their shared dream made real through determination and love. Georgia thought about all the women who had stood where she once stood, abandoned or desperate or lost, and she sent a silent prayer that they too might find their Owen Lawrence, their unexpected salvation that turned into everything they never knew they needed. She thought about her mother, wished she could have met her grandchildren, shown her the life Georgia had built from nothing but courage and the kindness of a cowboy who stopped when he could have kept riding. The future stretched before them, unknown but no longer frightening. They would face it together, she and Owen, with their children and whatever else life brought their way. There would be more challenges, more joys, more ordinary days that comprised a life fully lived. But they would face it all with the same partnership that had carried them from that first desperate day to this moment of quiet contentment. "Where to?" Owen asked softly, echoing that first question he had posed 10 years earlier. Georgia smiled in the darkness, her hand finding his and holding tight. "Anywhere with you," she answered. "Everywhere with you. Right here with you. Wherever we are together, that is exactly where I want to be." Owen kissed her temple, a gesture so familiar and dear it made her throat tighten with emotion. They sat in comfortable silence, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the wreckage of their separate pasts. The night deepened around them, and still they sat, neither willing to break the spell of perfect peace that had settled over their home. Eventually they went inside, checked on the sleeping children one last time, and retired to their own room. As Georgia lay in Owen's arms, listening to his breathing slow into sleep, she reflected on the impossible, improbable, wonderful journey that had brought her from a dusty trading post in Eldorado Canyon to this moment of complete fulfillment. She had been lost and had been found. She had been abandoned and had been chosen. She had been hopeless and had discovered that hope could bloom in the most unexpected places, carried by a stranger with kind eyes who asked where she wanted to go and then took her there. She fell asleep smiling, as she did most nights, grateful beyond words for the twist of fate that had brought Owen Lawrence into her life at the exact moment she needed him most. Their love story had started with desperation and a leap of faith, but it had grown into something solid and lasting, a partnership that would endure for all their days. And if anyone asked Georgia what her greatest achievement was, it would not be the successful ranch or the beautiful children or the respect of their community, though all of those mattered. Her greatest achievement was choosing to answer anywhere but here, and meaning it, trusting a stranger with her future, and building a life beyond her wildest dreams with the man who had become her everything. The years continued to unfold in the manner of good lives, with seasons of plenty and seasons of hardship, joys and sorrows, the full spectrum of human experience. Daniel and Rose grew into capable young adults who chose to stay on the ranch, carrying forward the legacy their parents had built. Daniel married a rancher's daughter from the neighboring property, expanding their operation and ensuring its continuation into the next generation. Rose, true to her gentle nature, became known throughout the region for her skill with horses, particularly in treating sick or injured animals. Owen and Georgia aged together, their bodies showing the wear of hard work and harsh conditions, but their love never wavering from that first spark that had ignited at the trading post so many years before. They became the elders of their community, the couple people pointed to as an example of what marriage could be when built on mutual respect and genuine partnership. They told their story sometimes, when asked, about how they met and fell in love in less than a week, and younger folks would shake their heads in wonder that such things were possible. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Owen gave Georgia a gift he had been working on in secret for months. It was a detailed carving of the trading post in Eldorado Canyon, painstakingly recreated from his memories of that day. On the base, he had carved the words where our story began, and when Georgia saw it, she wept tears of joy and gratitude. "I never want to forget where we came from," Owen said, holding her close. "The desperation and the hope, the fear and the courage. We were both broken people when we met, Georgia. You from being abandoned, me from years of believing I did not deserve love or happiness. But we healed each other, built each other back up into something stronger than we could have been alone." "We did," Georgia agreed, touching the carved trading post with gentle fingers. "And we gave our children something neither of us had growing up, a stable home with parents who love each other. That might be the greatest gift we have given anyone." They lived into their 60s, unusual longevity for people who had lived such physically demanding lives. When Owen finally passed, peacefully in his sleep after a day spent working on the ranch he loved, Georgia mourned him with the deep grief of someone who had lost half of herself. But she did not fall apart. The strength he had seen in her at that trading post, the resilience that had first caught his attention, carried her through the grief and into a new phase of her life. She lived another 5 years after Owen's death, spending her time with grandchildren who called her Nana and listened with rapt attention to her stories of the old days. She never remarried, never even considered it. Owen had been her great love, her only love, and she was content with the memories of their years together. On a summer evening remarkably similar to that night when she and Owen had sat on the porch discussing the past, Georgia sat in the same swing with her oldest granddaughter, a bright girl of 14 who reminded her painfully of herself at that age. "Nana," the girl asked, "how did you know Grandpa was the right one? How did you know to trust him?" Georgia thought about the question carefully, wanting to give an answer worthy of the asking. "I did not know," she said honestly, "not with certainty. But I made a choice to be brave, to trust my instincts even when I was terrified. Your grandfather gave me the space to make that choice freely, never pushed or demanded, just offered possibilities. And then we chose each other, every single day, through good times and hard times. Love is not just a feeling, sweetheart. It is a decision you make over and over again to show up, to work hard, to forgive, to grow together. Your grandfather and I, we made that decision thousands of times over the years, and it made all the difference." The girl thought about this, her young face serious. "I want that someday, what you and Grandpa had. Then be brave enough to reach for it when it appears," Georgia advised, "and patient enough to recognize it may not look like what you expected. I certainly did not expect to find the love of my life when I was standing abandoned at a trading post in the desert. But there he was, asking where I wanted to go and then taking me there. Sometimes the best things in life come from the worst moments, if we are brave enough to say yes to possibility." Georgia passed away peacefully in her sleep a few weeks later, surrounded by the family she and Owen had created in the home they had built together. At her funeral, the church was packed with people whose lives she had touched, whose respect she had earned through decades of kindness and hard work and genuine care for her community. They buried her next to Owen on a hillside overlooking their ranch, the view encompassing everything they had built together. On her headstone, their children inscribed the words, "She said anywhere but here, and he showed her everywhere. Together they built a love that lasted forever." The ranch continued under the management of their descendants, the Lawrence name becoming synonymous with quality and integrity in that part of Nevada. The story of how it all began, with a desperate woman and a kind cowboy at a dusty trading post, became family legend, passed down through generations as an example of how courage and kindness can transform desperation into something beautiful. And if sometimes, on quiet summer evenings, ranch hands swore they could hear laughter from the original cabin, or see two figures sitting together on the porch of the main house, well, those were just stories. But they were good stories, the kind that reminded people that love was real and lasting, that happy endings were possible even when circumstances seemed hopeless, that sometimes the right person appears at exactly the right moment and everything changes. Georgia and Owen's love story started at a trading post in Eldorado Canyon on a hot day in 1876, with a question and an answer that opened the door to everything that followed. It was a fast courtship that became a slow, deep, abiding love, the kind that sustains families and builds legacies. It was proof that sometimes the best response to "where to" is anywhere but here, because anywhere can become everywhere when you find the right person to travel with through life. Their story ended as all stories must, with death and memory, but the love they shared did not end. It continued in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch they built, in the community they strengthened, in every life they touched with their example of what partnership and commitment could create. And that, perhaps, is the truest form of happily ever after. Love that transcends individual lives to become something larger, something that echoes through time and inspires others to reach for their own unexpected joy. In the end, Georgia had been right that first day when she decided to trust a stranger with whiskey-colored eyes and a kind voice. anywhere, but there had turned into everywhere that mattered. And she had lived a life beyond her wildest dreams, loved and been loved by a man worth loving, built something lasting from the ashes of abandonment. It was a good life, a life well lived, a life that proved sometimes the worst moments carry within them the seeds of the very best moments, if only we are brave enough to say yes when possibilities appear.